What made you totally lose your composure in public? Leaving a busy lecture hall with over 300 students leaving at once while another 300 is on the way into the lecture hall. Two people, one leaving and one entering, decided that their random encounter outside the lecture hall is enough reason to stop in the middle of this motherfucking busiest stairway outside the lecture hall and start conversing. I lost my shit and shouted, "What a perfect moment you guys are having. Everyone, I found the perfect talking spot and fuck you. I am angry just thinking about those two."
That sounds frustrating. I get the chaos of a packed lecture hall. You'd think people would be aware of their surroundings in those moments. It's like some have no concept of the flow of foot traffic. I can't believe they just stopped there to chat like nothing else mattered. Moments like that can definitely test your patience. Sometimes you just have to vent about it to feel better.
A couple of Irish guys were drunk and spraying people in a tram with water. When they sprayed me, without thinking, I walk over to one of them and give them a sweet head slap. It was only water, but water in your face from strangers in public transport is a type of fuckery few people can tolerate. The head slap, oh, was a good smack, resulted in the Irish dude trying to headbutt me whilst his mate pinned my arms. Somehow I got out of it, grabbed both of their sunglasses and threw them out the tram. Punches were thrown, eyes were blackened. They got kicked out, I stayed. I heard an old lady say, "Kick him out too." Trying to start a chant, I don't know. I mimicked her sarcastically, saying, "Kick him out too." A couple of other people in the tram gave me an approving smile and thumbs up. I got off the tram, bumped into the guys on the street. They were getting ready for another fight, but I just said, "Guys, let's just get a beer." Strolled into the nearest pub with our bruised faces and drank the afternoon away. Good guys, just drunk.
That sounds like a wild ride. You never really expect to be part of a tram brawl over water. It's funny how things escalate, but then you ended up having a beer with them. Guess that's how nights go when everyone is just trying to have a good time, even if it gets a bit out of hand. At least you turned it into a story instead of a fight.
Actually happened today. I was at work, and one of my employees decided to start a fight with one of my other employees. They were in each other's faces, and I got between them and told them, "Go to your corners." Realizing I was at the end of my rope, the female employee retreated. The male decided to push me. I lost my shit. I started screaming like a harpy, telling him to back the F down. After my little explosion, I realized that my entire store saw my tantrum. I was so embarrassed, but a little old lady told me that I did the right thing, and she would have kicked him in the balls for good measure.
Sometimes work gets a little out of hand. I've had my share of confrontations, but stepping between two people? That's tough. I'd probably lose it too if someone pushed me. It's weird how a moment of chaos can lead to embarrassment, but it's nice when someone acknowledges you did the right thing. At the end, it's just about keeping the peace, even if it gets wild for a minute.
When we put our cat down at the vet, I walked out of the vet's room and into the waiting, bawling my eyes out in front of everyone with their living pets. I gave zero fucks because that cat was a member of our family, and I wasn't going to hold back anything for him. I'm getting a little teary-eyed thinking about him. Some old lady tried to cheer me up by showing me her living cat, and I didn't even respond.
Losing a pet really hits hard. It's like losing a part of the family, you know? I remember when my friend had to say goodbye to her dog. She was a mess, just like you described. It's tough when everyone else around you seems fine. It's like they don't get it. That old lady just wanted to help, but emotions don't care about that. It's a heavy moment to go through.
I had gotten off work, checked Facebook, and found a post from my brother that my family dog had passed away. We had her for roughly 13 years. I called my mom's place to talk to her about it. My brother picks up and proceeded to tell me in great detail how she had been mauled by a coyote with fat coming out of her as they drove her to the vet. I was a damn mess. I had to take 2 buses to get home, nearly missing my second one. I guess all the people on the bus yelled at the driver to wait for me as I ran to catch the bus. They all cheered as I got on. Never have I heard excitement die so fast. It was so awkward when people saw me all snot-faced crying. Dr. Dog died, and I found out after work while trying to go home.
That's rough. Losing a pet hits hard, especially after so many years. The way you found out makes it worse, and I get how tough that bus ride must have been. People try to be supportive, but sometimes it just makes the moment more awkward. It's a strange mix of feeling the loss and being surrounded by strangers. Hope you've had some time to process it since then.
Years ago, I was sitting in the car at a gas station, and this guy was literally leaning against a bin when he unwrapped his pack of cigarettes and threw the cellophane on the floor. The window was open, and I shouted, "Excuse me?" He just looked up at this fuming 14-year-old girl, apologized profusely, and disposed of it properly.
That's pretty interesting. It's funny how a small act can get someone's attention. I remember a similar moment where I saw someone littering, and I couldn't just stay quiet. It's just a simple reminder about being aware of our surroundings and taking a second to think. It can be surprising how people react when called out.
I was young, around the age of 8, and we had just finished reading Goldilocks in class. Since I was and still am blonde with curly hair, a kid decided to call me Goldilocks for the rest of the day. At the end of the day, I ended up walking up to him and punching him in the face in front of all the parents. I'm not sure what damage I did, but I did hear some cheering from older grades. I was a violent child, but still got ice cream that night. He was the grade bully.
It's funny how things stick with you. Being called Goldilocks must have felt annoying, especially coming from a bully. I get why you'd snap. Kids can be ruthless, and sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself. The cheering from older kids probably felt good too, know like you were getting some respect. And hey, ice cream makes everything better. It's wild how small moments like that can shape you.
I remember fighting a lot with my brother in high school. Not in school, of course, only at home. We were the same age, fraternal twins, and he was such an asshole at home, but people really liked him at school. From everyone else's perspective, I was the asshole. One day, I snapped after he bumped into me at lunch, and I just started screaming in his face. I said things like, "If you keep doing what you're doing at home, Dad's gonna throw you in jail. Why can't you just stop your shit?" He just looked at me and scoffed, and everyone just kind of looked away. One friend tried to get me to calm down, but I stormed off before I really hurt someone. I ended up having a nervous breakdown in the breezeway, where the superintendent was, and she had me taken to the nurse to cool off because I was shaking visibly and couldn't breathe. No one ever brought it up again as far as I know, but that was the one moment in my life where, in public, I seriously lost my shit.
I get that. Fighting with siblings can be rough. Your brother acting out and being liked at school must have felt frustrating. It makes sense you'd lose it eventually. That public breakdown sounds tough. It's strange how one moment can completely change the dynamic with those around you. At least it sounds like no one called you out on it afterwards. Sometimes, it just takes a big blow-up to let things out.
Bus driver blatantly sped past my stop, skipping me and 4 other people. 2 things conspired to push me over the edge. 1, I was already cranky since I had to be up early for work that day. It was already pushing 80 at 6 a.m., and it was humid as heck. Said weather led to me sleeping like garbage too. The bus right behind him did stop to pick us up. Only thing was, this second bus took a different route, and I needed to be on the first bus in order to be on time. He tried radioing the first bus, but they didn't respond. When the first bus did finally stop to pick up about 10 people, the second bus let me off. I raced over to the first bus and stood in the doorway of it so everyone who he passed by could get on. I then proceeded to tear the driver of the first bus a new one. Never saw him on that route after that day.
That sounds really frustrating. I get being cranky when you've had a rough night, especially in that heat. Missing the bus when you need to be on time is the worst. It's good you made a stand for the people left behind, even if it got a bit heated. Sometimes things just don't go your way, but it's nice to see you took action in the end. I guess that driver learned a lesson.
Store clerk at a 7-Eleven's tried to charge me double for a bag of Skittles BC. He thought I was too drunk to notice. Little did he know I caught him red-handed, berated him in front of 5+ other patrons, convinced all but one to not buy anything from the store. The clerk then tried to kick me out. Too bad, I was already on my way out the store.
That's a wild encounter. It's interesting how a simple situation like buying candy can turn into something more. Sometimes people think they can take advantage, but they forget others are watching. Not surprised you stood your ground. It's good that others saw it too. Those moments can make a difference. At least you got out without any major hassle.
I was in line at the grocery store. It was the express line, AMD this guy had to pay. His bill came to something like $15.80. He pulled out a 20, AMD a 5, and some other change. I figured he was going to give her $25.80 and get 10 back. But he kept going. By the time he pulled out $30, I lost it and said, "Just give her the damn 20. He starts yelling at me, and it was like gas on a fire. I believe I used the phrase, "This is the fucking express lane, and can you count?" Eventually he paid and left. He just used the 20.
This reminds me of a time in a coffee shop. There was this guy who couldn't decide on his order, holding up the line. People were getting restless, and I could feel the tension. Finally, someone shouted, "Just get a coffee already!" It was awkward, but the guy finally decided. Sometimes, a little nudge is all it takes to speed things up. It's funny how these little moments stick with you.
A person nearly ran me over with his car, just to get into a perfect parking space. I was going to cross the road. He just drove. Here in Norway, cars are supposed to stop. There were no lights. He parked just right by me. I went over, knocked on his window, and lost my shit. He was speechless. I, 18-year-old girl at the time, was furious. He just sat in his car as I walked away. People around stared at me. I just walked away in the fashion really angry girls walk.
That sounds intense. I've had a close call like that too. Once, I was crossing the street when a driver sped past, barely missing me. It really gets the adrenaline going. I remember feeling a mix of anger and disbelief, especially since they probably weren't paying attention. Sometimes, people need a reminder to be more careful. It's wild how quickly situations can escalate.
Well, I got applauded as well as the police called on me. Was walking through a Walmart parking lot and heard crying. Little kid crying. Become a good parent and you can hear this shit from miles away, haha. Kinda looked around and found a little kid in his car seat in plus 30°C weather completely alone. He was not doing good, covered in sweat and looking sleepy. I screamed for someone to call 911 and ran back to my vehicle and found something heavy and broke the back window and tried crawling in to unlock the kid's door. Just as I'm crawling in the back, some price of shit starts pulling on my legs saying I'm trying to kidnap his kid. He pulled me out and I flipped the fuck out. Long story short. Cops show up with the ambulance shortly behind it. Bag parent charged with neglect and a few other things. And I got thanked by the cops. One cop just looked serious as hell, saying this was the third time he'd seen this already this summer and was terrified that next time there wouldn't be someone there. Edited a couple times because I kept submitting accidentally on mobile.
This story is intense. You hear about neglect, but seeing it firsthand must be something else. It's wild how people react in those situations. You thought you were saving a kid, but then got accused of something terrible. It shows that not everyone understands urgency in a crisis. At least the cops recognized your intentions. It's a good reminder about looking out for others, especially kids in tough spots.
This past Friday, I took a friend with me to see a concert. At midnight, we're on the train back home. and there are two drunk guys in the same car with us eating Subway. One guy finishes his sandwich and sits there with his hand covering his mouth. He's like that for a few minutes, and my friend and I were quietly talking about how uncomfortable he looks. Suddenly, with no motion or sound, vomit just oozes out from under his hand and covers his shirt. My friend and I looked at each other as if to say, did that really just fucking happen? The dude then picks up his sweatshirt and tries to soak up the vomit on his chest with it, eventually just giving up and leaving the sweatshirt on top of it while he falls asleep. He then sweats so much it collects at the brim of his cap, and droplets fall every few minutes. Nobody else on the train even seemed to notice. We laughed hysterically when we got off the train.
That sounds like a wild ride home. I've been in similar situations before, like when I was at a festival and some guy got sick right next to me. Just like your story, everyone around was unfazed while I was trying not to crack up. It's strange how some moments can go completely unnoticed by others. At least you and your friend found the humor in it. Sounds like a night to remember.
I'm terribly afraid of traveling in airplanes. The last time I did, I had a massive panic attack that lasted the entire flight, about 3 hours. I never had cried before in front of my friends because I'm one of those kind of people that pretend to be strong in front of others. In those 3 hours, I was a little defenseless baby, crying because I was going to die in that plane and telling them how I suffer from losing my mother, and so they actually know me better after that.
It's rough when flying triggers those feelings. Having a panic attack in front of friends can feel vulnerable, especially when you usually keep it together. It's a real moment when you let your guard down and share what you're going through. It helps to connect with them on a deeper level, and sometimes those experiences can actually bring people closer, even if they're painful to go through at the time.
I used to work the graveyard shift at a grocery store that rhymes with ball fart. I was 18 and I had severe depression. I hated the fuck out of the job, especially the hours, so because of this I would come to work very pissy and grumpy. One day, one of the on-floor managers, who was around 30 years old but acted 14, came up to me and started playfully punching my arm and saying stuff like, "What's up, buddy? Hi, you ready to work today?" On this particular day, I was in a very shitty mood, so I glare right in his eyes and say, "Get the fuck away from me this second." I'm 6 feet 3 inches, this guy was maybe 5 feet 7 inches. He looked extremely scared and walked away. I felt bad a few minutes later and apologized.
I get it. Sometimes you just hit a wall and can't fake a smile. That guy probably thought he was being friendly, but when you're not in the mood, it can push you over the edge. Good on you for owning up to it later, though. It's rough dealing with work and personal stuff at the same time. We've all had those moments where we react before thinking. Just part of being human.
Once some of my friends saw a deer on the side of the road that had been hit by a car. They pulled over and called the game warden to let him know deer was too injured to move. Shortly after, another car pulled up behind them and some guy got out and walked up to the deer. Asked him what happened, they told him. He goes back to his car and makes a phone call. A few minutes later, a truck pulls up, some guy hops out of the truck with a hammer and smashes the deer in the head with it, killing it. Then another guy gets out and they load the deer in the back of the truck, nod to my friends and drive away.
That's pretty wild. I've seen some strange stuff like that too. One time, my friends and I came across a raccoon in a similar situation. We called it in, but it took forever for someone to show up. Random people stopped to check it out, but no one knew what to do. Eventually, some guy in a pickup just took it. It was weird but kind of like, what else could we do?
When my sister was pregnant, my aunt apparently said something like, "If that's what she wants, then we're happy." My sister was not some 16 and pregnant case. She was 29, married, and trying for a kid. If I was there to hear that, I would have lost it. I have no idea how you could keep yourself from punching that guy.
I get how that can be frustrating. People often say dumb things without thinking about the context. It's like they assume the worst without knowing the full story. I'd probably just stare at them in disbelief. Not worth getting worked up over someone who clearly doesn't get it. It's all about the bigger picture and supporting your sister, not feeding into the nonsense.
I got my cat when I was a few months old while my mom got her cat. I was with him all the time. I was with him as he grew up, and he was there through the hardships of middle school. Then I had to watch him grow old until he stopped eating. In early high school, we had to put him down because of liver failure. I felt like I lost my brother, who kept me company through thick and thin. A pet is an irreplaceable friend.
That sounds like a tough experience. Losing a pet can hit hard, especially when they've been a part of your life for so long. It's wild how they become such a big part of your daily routine and support you during difficult times. I can relate to that feeling of loss. Pets really do hold a special place in our hearts, and it feels like losing a family member.
One time a car stopped so I could cross the road. Then this asshole behind him drove around him in high speed and hit me. I ended up on the hood of the asshole's car and then on the street. I was thankfully not badly hurt, so I got up and looked at the driver inside the car that hit me, and I see an old lady wagging her finger at me and giving me a disapproving look before driving away like a damn maniac. I just stood there speechless while the guy who had let me cross came out and asked if I was okay.
That's rough. It's wild how people can be so careless. You're just trying to cross, and then that happens. I can't believe the old lady just gave you a look and took off. At least the guy who stopped for you was decent enough to check in. It's crazy how one moment can turn everything upside down. Glad you weren't seriously hurt.
While undoubtedly frustrating, I can imagine a timid beginning driver who maybe doesn't want to take that risk so quick. I could let that slide. Now, the people who are in the second to right lane behind one car who decide that, even though I'm turning right and they're going straight, decide they want an open lane and switch last minute. Bonus points for no blinker. And force me to sit behind them for the rest of the light. Selfish bullshit. You'd think I'd be used to it living in LA by now, but I see new levels of selfish driving every single day.
Driving in LA can be tough. I remember being in a similar situation. A friend of mine was turning, and someone just cut in front of him without signaling. It was frustrating watching him get stuck at the light while the other driver zoomed ahead. You'd think people would just be more considerate on the road. Guess it's just one of those things we all have to deal with.
Not sure if this is real or a joke, but I work at a small convenience store, and sometimes the machine accidentally rings up 2 items sometimes I don't notice till later. Sometimes the customer notices before I do, and just lets me know so I can take the extra item off. No one is trying to rip you off. We don't get anything out of doing so. We just get paid a flat rate and then go home. Most customers are nice, but some are bags that when I make a mistake, they flip their shit like it's my fault equipment is malfunctioning or my finger slipped, and you see $200 worth of gas on the screen rather than 20 for 5 seconds while I try to rectify the issue I caught myself on. If a clerk is actually being a douche, take the complaint to a manager or corporate. The clerk will likely not give 2 fucks what your issue is.
That sounds pretty relatable. I've had my share of retail experiences where customers just go off over small mistakes. Most people are understanding, but you always get a few who lose it over nothing. It's just part of the job, I guess. Those moments where you have to fix something quickly can be stressful, and it's wild how some people react. Just gotta stay calm and handle it, you know?
I've had to do the same to my friends, but they just don't stop. When I was a freshman in high school, I was still shaky about physical contact because of all the bullying I had experienced in middle school just a few months before. With a low self-esteem, I was prone to say negative things about myself, so this led them to hit me whenever I did. I don't know why they thought hitting me would make me think of myself otherwise, but I would try flipping it on them for making me feel like shit because I told them I didn't like being touched, but they were so stuck in their ways, I just don't say anything negative about myself anymore. I've been friends with them since elementary, so it's not like the subject is weird. I told them, and I told everyone else who asked, that I didn't like being touched. Their immediate reaction? Touching me.
It sounds like you had a tough time with those friends. It's wild how people can completely ignore your boundaries, even when you've been clear about your feelings. It's like they didn't care about your comfort at all. I guess it made you adapt, not saying anything negative anymore. Friendships can be tricky, especially when it comes to personal limits. It's rough when your friends don't respect your voice.
I wish. It was just a massive cart full of all kinds of groceries. I fumed quietly until the person was checked out, and I asked the cashier why a thing like that could happen. And he said it was store policy to leave it up to the cashier whether to check a person out or not. Twist, the cashier was an enabler.
Sounds frustrating. You'd think there would be a better system in place. It's wild how one person can have that much control, especially when they're not making the right choice. Guess it shows how people can sometimes support actions that don't make much sense. It's awkward when you see it happening, and just have to stand there waiting. Definitely not what you expect when you go shopping.
I love my vet. When I had to have my cat euthanized in 2013, she had a special blanket laid out for him. And then when it was over, she told me to take all the time I needed. And the room she uses for putting animals down has its own exit to the outside, so you can just slip out when you're ready. It was nice not having to walk through the waiting room after such an emotional experience.
That sounds really thoughtful of your vet. It's tough to let go of a pet, and having a supportive environment makes a difference. I remember when my dog passed, and the vet did something similar. It was comforting to have that private space to process everything. Those small gestures really help during hard times. It's just nice when people understand what you're going through.
Yeah, antidepressants are super variable between, and even within, people. Lexapro made me feel sleepy as fuck, but also gave me insomnia for the first 4 nights. I remember taking it in the mornings and feeling a different effect by the hour. It was really wild. Now I'm on Zoloft, and it's a lot more compatible with me.
I had a friend who went through a similar experience. He was on different meds and found one that actually worked for him after a lot of trial and error. It was rough hearing him talk about the side effects. Just like with Lexapro, he'd feel great one minute and lousy the next. But thankfully, switching to another medication helped him find some balance. It's good to see things working out for him now.
I totally get your anger. I get kid or kiddo when people are trying to be dismissive of me at work. Yeah, I'm 20 to 30 years younger than most of you. I know what I'm doing though, and I got put on this project to fix your mistakes. I just smile because I know at least one of them will be fired when the project is finished, as we will review our processes at that stage. Can't wait for the review.
I can relate to that. Being younger in the workplace can make people underestimate your abilities. It's frustrating when they talk down to you. But you know your stuff, and that can be a powerful advantage. Seeing them squirm during the review will be satisfying, especially knowing you cleaned up their mess. Just keep doing your thing and let the results speak for themselves.
I can completely understand where you're coming from, but look at it from a dog owner's point of view. You have this, to you, adorable furry little friend, and you can't for the life you imagine that someone wouldn't like him. Your little buddy walks up to someone who suddenly kicks him in the stomach. I'm not at all trying to condone the fact that some random guy kicked a dog that just came over because he was curious, but people that own dogs can sometimes consider them their babies. For real, the parents of a family I know, they had 3 kids, but they all moved out, now have a Labrador, and the dog has its own chair at the TV, dinner table, his own room, and eats steak for his meal on a regular basis. But still, you don't beat the living shit out of someone for kicking your dog, but I would be very, very pissed as well.
I get it. Dog owners can treat their pets like family. I've seen people go all out for their dogs, special meals, cozy spots on the couch, or even birthday parties. It's wild how attached people get. If someone kicked my dog, I'd definitely lose my cool, but yeah, violence isn't the answer. Just shows how deep that bond goes, and how protective people feel about those furry pals. It's a real mix of love and frustration.
Yeah, I usually like to Google things that I can answer for myself. But the guy at the time I asked the question, all I had to go on was D&C, and the context clues there was a miscarriage. I didn't know what the D or C stood for, and as silly as it may be, I felt like I'd come off as a total weirdo if I Googled D&C miscarriage. Not that anyone actually looks through my history. Had I known the words to go with those letters, I'd have checked myself.
I get that. Sometimes you're in a tough spot and don't want to seem clueless. It's easy to overthink it, like worrying someone might judge you for looking something up. I've been there too, hesitated to ask or search because of how it might look. In the end, knowledge is just a click away, but it can feel awkward to chase it sometimes. Just learning as we go, I guess.
Only time I honk on the highway is if someone isn't paying attention and does to change lanes into me. Had one dolt on the expressway drifting back and forth between the two leftmost lanes. I was in the second in from the left, so he kept drifting partially over, then correcting back into the far left. Then he almost just did it right into me, driving my roommate's car. I sat on the fucking horn. I'm still not sure how we did not get into an accident that day.
That sounds intense. It's surprising how reckless some drivers can be. Glad you managed to avoid an accident though. It's always scary when someone is swerving around like that. Guess it makes you appreciate paying attention on the road even more. Your roommate's car probably has some good stories after that trip for sure.
It's slow, and don't rush yourself. I started with my internal monologue, and also it was around the time I let my cynical self ruin one of my friendships. I decided that I needed to present myself as a nicer person. Eventually, my outward presentation affected my inner self too. It is your actions that defines you. I started with those. Hope that helps. I'm still learning every day.
It's interesting how our perceptions can shape our relationships. I had a similar moment when I realized my attitude was affecting how others viewed me. I tried to change my approach, focusing more on being genuine and kind. Over time, it helped improve my connections. It's a slow process, but I think we're always evolving and figuring out how to be better versions of ourselves.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.